I'm Tim Ventura here with Bruce Smith. Bruce is an independent journalist working with investigative reporting into anti-gravity and field effect propulsion technology as well as new energy technology. Bruce, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, Tim.
Great. Well, I'd like to start off by asking just what you've been able to find over the last year or so that you've been doing research into this field.
I haven't found a UFO yet that's going to lift me off
Yeah.
any place. Um, my journey into anti-gravity started with a personal journey of a spiritual nature,
Oh, okay.
and that's really. Let me just walk you through how I got to you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, and then where you pointed me, what directions you pointed me in, and then what I found when I went there. I'm in the Ramtha School of Enlightenment, and I'm not here to advocate or preach that, but just to simply state that that's where I started this journey. And my quest is to levitate.
Okay, okay.
And so I was checking out the how that might be, the science of that. And there is a fair amount of science along those lines that's presented by Ramtha at the Ramtha School of Enlightenment. And along the way, read The Field by Lynn McTaggart and The Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook. Both books were highly recommended by Ramtha to read. And if it wasn't for the Ramtha School, I probably would not have heard of either one of those books. And they're excellent books, but they're very different on different subjects. And so reading those books kind of gave me a background when I had begun writing. I've been for the Golden Thread magazine, which was loosely affiliated with the Ramtha School. And my initial interests as a journalist was how do people create the miraculous in their life? And by miraculous, I mean the extraordinary, like healing a heart attack through meditation.
Sure, sure.
And so that's where I began writing as a journalist, and interviewed about 7 people with some fascinating stories. Somebody healed themselves of diabetes. Somebody recovered $40,000 worth of stolen goods. 2 heart attack stories. Someone who healed a family of chronic anger and dysfunction and things like that. So, and I went to my editor and I said, what we really should have is an interview with some of the people that we're reading about, like Nick Cook. And we should get more information about anti-gravity technology. And Lynn McTaggart's understanding of the zero-point energy field is sublime in the extreme. And he basically said, go for it. And so I had just bought a computer. I had just become computer literate to launch this personal journey of mine. And so I'm moving on a couple fronts, a spiritual front, a personal technological front of becoming a PC literate, and then becoming a more advanced journalist. I've been a storyteller and written lots of stories on and off for the last 10, 15 years. But this was my boldest and greatest venture into journalism. And so all the people that I thought would be interesting to talk to, such as Nick Cook and Dr. Dan Marcus and Hal Puthoff and Eugene Podkletnov and people at the Institute of Noetic Sciences and Edgar Mitchell and all of that, nobody returned my email. Nobody returned my letters. Nobody returned my phone calls. And I continued to surf the web as a new initiate into the internet. Every night was a new experience and would invariably hit some buttons that would get me into different places. And in some ways I felt guided by spirit, shall we say. And I Googled. Googling was a new experience for me, and I Googled anti-gravity, and I got you.
Oh, okay. Well,
The American Anti-Gravity website popped up, and I thought I had just gone to heaven. Because on every page, every click of the mouse, you had great stuff to read. And and I realized, and I said, my God, I'm in Yelm, Washington, and this guy's in Kirkland, Washington, just down the road. What are the odds of that happening? You could be anywhere on the planet, and you happen to be, a few miles down the interstate. And I said, this is very, very cool.
Well, the thing that's surprised me to some extent about the Ramtha School, and in a way it's been kind of a positive thing to learn about the approach that's being used, because, as you well know, I'm not really associated with the school and know virtually nothing about Ramtha or the spiritual approach. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that had surprised me was, being approached by yourself and then meeting a few other people also who are affiliated with the school, simply by the virtue of living in Washington State. One of the things that I'd always felt was that it was a very spiritual organization, and typically speaking, people who are interested in spirituality tend not to be technically oriented. And I don't see that as a fault. It's just a different path that people take.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that had surprised me was you'd actually sent me 2 books, actually, just to learn a little bit more about kind of the spiritual teachings of the school. And yeah, I had some time to sit down and read through them, and I was surprised to find very in-depth description from the parts, I guess, that most people would be aware of are quantum physics, and that's verifiable. In other words, I've read the information in other places. Neural psychology, which is verifiable, although more so difficult to track down. And surprisingly enough, and I'm actually not sure where this would come from, but I actually found some very innovative concepts in information theory, a few of which actually aren't even known to the public yet. They've just come out in the last year or two in the very technically oriented computer science, theory field. So there's definitely a push there, and I found that I was actually really excited that a spiritual organization was finally kind of crossing over, so to speak, and looking at issues that were larger than just, well, not larger perhaps, but divergent from internal issues, I guess. Looking at the external world and trying to bring it inside, so to speak.
Yeah, some kind of esoteric spiritual philosophy or something like that.
Well, now with anti-gravity, you've been researching for about a year, and I hope that I was able to provide some useful information, but you've definitely gone down your own path in terms of independent research. Who are some of the people that you've been able to make contact with and learn from?
Well, I've learned from everyone that I've made contact with, and I feel blessed by the folks that I've come in contact with. Perhaps I could talk about the technology, but I'll also talk about the personalities, because I think that's also part of the story, and it's a delightful tidbit. And I'll just give you some ideas as the thoughts and the names pop into my head.
Oh, absolutely.
One is Eugene Podkletnov, and for those who may not be familiar with his name and his work, he is perhaps one of the foremost researchers in gravity shielding technology out of Finland. And he's working with rotating superconductive disks that are being spun in an electromagnetic field. And that kind of basic technological model, is one that I keep hearing over and over again. I hear Ram talk about creating Torsian fields with the energy fields around our body. Nick Cook talks about the Germans during World War II creating the bell, which had counter-rotating electromagnetic fields. It seems when you come to anti-gravity and you come to levitation, you're going to be spinning something somewhere. And Eugene was a delight. He has not responded to any of my emails in the past year, and there's a story to that which I do not know the ending of. But for the first half of my research, Eugene was a frequent correspondent with me in emails, and his emails are like haikus from a European gentleman from another time and another place. He's poetic, he's soft, he's insightful. We would share dreams with each other. He would give me links to some of the things that his buddies were doing in some very esoteric fields in Russia, like in the gravitational weight changes in people who are having dominant anomaly was that she would lose about 90% of her gravitational weight when she was sleepwalking.
Oh, no, I've never heard Eugene talk about anything on those lines. He's always
Oh
been
yeah,
very.
Eugene is this kind of guy. I mean, every time he would email me, every time we would talk, there'd be something charming and something completely unexpected. And he never talked about his work specifically. He never described any details. I understand he's become extraordinarily protective. I've read in the literature that once upon a time, maybe 10 years ago, journalists were able to actually see him in his office or see him in his laboratory in Finland, and kind of get a hands-on view of exactly what all this gravity shielding stuff looks like and where it's being done. And those days are long gone, because apparently Eugene, it is reported, now he did not tell me this, but it's reported in the various literature that he has had proprietary pressures put upon him. I also would suspect that there's tremendous political pressures on him, and I would think that ultimately that's the bottom line why he doesn't respond to any of my emails anymore, because he's become enraptured in a global geopolitical process. The last reports on Eugene, which came from Nick Cook and from other sources, is that Eugene was in fact hired by Boeing to conduct his gravity shielding work for them under a proprietary relationship. It was also reported, again by Nick Cook and by the UK Ministry of Defense, that the Ruskies were pretty upset about that. And you can only begin to imagine what the Russian military their concerns would be about one of their countrymen who is now working in Finland, who's going to jump in with the Amerikanskis and not take care of the fatherland or the motherland or what. You can only begin to speculate on the metaphorical and political implications of all of this, and the fact that Boeing, as the world's largest aerospace contractor, is absolutely mum on this. I get no response from Boeing officially whatsoever on any question that has to do with field effect propulsion of anti-gravity or anything like that. Totally mum on the subject. Whereas British Aerospace is not at all. And British Aerospace and the people that are contracted to British Aerospace, and they're doing lots of Pott-Klett-Knopf replication research. They are extraordinarily open and very conversant. And I've been able to contact Clive Woods, who was one of the leaders in Pott-Klett-Knopf replication research at Sheffield University in the UK. He and I, again, it was like Eugene. He would wax poetically and extensively about his work and different kinds of esoteric things. Clive has moved university. He's now working in the U.S. for I believe Iowa State University or some large state school in Ames, Iowa, and it's just down the road from the Maharishi University. And the Maharishi University is developing quite a reputation for teaching advanced meditation techniques where people levitate. Although Clive would not call it levitation at all, and I'm reluctant to. The Maharishi people call it yogic flying, and most people that see it when it's done, and I've only seen videotapes of it, would call it hopping, where people go into an advanced meditative state, create this trance field, and there's been a lot of discussion about exactly what is the physiological aspects of trance. Is there some kind of new electromagnetic field that is created in the body and around the body by doing trance work? Is there perhaps an aspect of superconductivity that occurs in the brain that you can build a coherence field, a quantum coherence field, that your body then would be literally a levitative anti-gravitic device, and that you can do this perhaps for a split second and pop off the ground, that you would be, for an instant, you would be anti-gravitic, and so you're going to go 30, 40 inches up in the air, which is what these guys do.
Oh yeah. Well, with Podklenoff and the mysterious Dr. Ning Li in Huntsville, Alabama, I've noticed that scientists researching this close to the formal side of things, I guess, because I believe they're both doctors. Eugene being a doctor in Russian mechanical engineering, I believe, and then Ning Li being
he has a PhD in materials science. Here's an interesting story and pedigree. Eugene is kind of following in his father's footsteps. His father was a civil engineer in Russia, in Moscow, for the city of Moscow, I believe, and received, when the Russians took over the eastern part of Germany, they apparently got all of the esoteric science that Nick Cook describes, like the bell, these kind of rotating fields. Didn't know what to do with it. They didn't have any scientists that could understand all of the documents, and Eugene's father ended up with it because he was dealing with the fluid mechanics of water and air and different mediums mixing together under pressure and spinning and making turns, 90-degree turns under the streets of Moscow and things like that, which is very similar to having electromagnetic fields and spinning, in some kind of Torsian-like experiment.
Oh, okay. Well,
So Eugene, I think Eugene is kind of just following along what his pop was, but um, so he's not a physicist. He's a hands-on kind of guy. He has a PhD in building things.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that in a way that puts him squarely in the middle, because it seems like with this type of research, at least from what I've been able to find, there are definitely hands-on people. Myself, to some degree, being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm definitely not the most talented out there by a long shot. There's so much talent; it's amazing. And then, and it runs the whole scale all the way over to PhD math wizards who are unable to build anything a lot of the time, but come up with just incredible theories. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that people on the more formal side of the scale, it seems like, have quieted down a little bit lately. I would say in the last few months, Ning Li actually sent me an email.
Congratulations. She's been unresponsive to anything I sent her.
Oh, well, actually, I hadn't. To finish, she sent me an email about a year and a half ago, so it's actually been unresponsive to me since then, also.
Okay.
But when she sent it, she'd said that they had achieved 11 kilowatts of effect. And I guess take that for what it will be in terms of AC gravity, which was her push-pull gravity generator, based almost precisely, at least from what I've read, on Podklenov's device. And it seems like not only has Eugene written fewer and fewer emails, because I'm in the same boat that you are on that. He's definitely a lot quieter. Ning Li has completely dropped out of sight.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, no one, even my NASA contacts, can get in touch with her. Nobody has updated contact info for her.
Mm-hmm.
I just received some information on some of her publications that I have yet to read through, but it seems like definitely, um, you know, I almost hope that what's happening here is that it's a startup mentality. I'm hoping that they're getting the kind of results that they would move into a startup phase with.
Yeah.
Because I guess the flip side would be that they're just bored or tired of the publicity or something. So I'm hoping that it's success that is making them quiet and not boredom.
Well, let's talk about a real reality, and that's security. The fact that Ning Li is disappearing off the scene, Eugene is not talking to any of us. The other company down in Huntsville that I was able to transformational technologies, transdimensional technologies.
Sure. And they had the 2001
they have gone
patent.
off the screen, the radar screen, and they had been a contractor to the Beyond Physics Propulsion folks to develop some kind of field effect propulsion, to develop the next generation of propulsion systems that are going to take us to Alpha Centauri. They had specific, extensive, publicly recorded contracts with NASA out of the Marshall Space Flight Center, Research Center in Huntsville, and they're gone. I mean, no phone number, no forwarding address, no email, no nothing. So I think what we might be seeing, and this is a possibility, is that all of this independent, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, work in the garage kind of situation. These people are getting somewhere, and the government is kind of putting them on ice, kind of bringing them into the house, and then putting them on ice and keeping them from public view.
Well,
And
oh, I'm sorry. This is actually the what you're describing right here is one of the Achilles heels of this type of research, and
yeah,
it's the minute something is found, people become quiet about it, and
yeah,
that's actually I'd sent out an email which you'd responded to, and several other people had also to a local college, Evergreen, because they have a different format than the average college, I suppose, and the idea had been, and I don't know if they'll respond. I'm assuming it'll probably be a negative response just because they're in the middle of their own stuff. But the idea was about creating possibly a program to teach these sciences in a very non judgmental way, just to allow students to research the things that interest them and then hopefully take some of that information and make it available to the public.
hmm
It may be not the only approach. I've seen other groups. Sterling D. Allen in Utah is actually working on putting together an online library. And there are a lot of other resources there. But the idea being that for a journalist such as yourself, it's great to have contacts, but at the same time, sometimes you need a place to start. And I've found that the more I learn, the more I'm able to learn. But for a lot of people, just learning about this, it's just next to impossible to find these things out.
hmm
So, well, in it,
yeah, and perhaps that's the story too. I mean, I don't think you can tell the anti-gravity story without telling the protection story and the secrecy story. And I just, for those who may not be aware of it, or people who might be who are very concerned about the black budgets and the secret projects and all of that, and the price we pay for that secrecy. Um, in Nick Cook's book, his secret source, Dr. Dan Marcus, who there's been a lot of speculation, and you've told me that it's one PhD guy, Marcus Hollingshed or something like that.
oh, not Dr. Dan though. Marcus Hollingshead is a very different individual. And in fact,
Okay.
I've never spoken to Dan Marcus. I've never been able to find out who he really was.
Oh, okay. Because Nick Cook has refused to tell me who he is also, and and the most compelling piece of information though is that in the Hunt for Zero Point, Dr. Dan Marcus is quoted as saying that the technology that's going to give us anti-gravity is going to give us a lot of different other kinds of technology too. It's just not anti-gravity. And if this technology should ever be weaponized, it would make thermonuclear devices look like firecrackers. And I think that that needs to be heeded, and that needs to be respected. This is not stuff that you want floating around with irresponsible people. And again, it comes back to a spiritual thing. Are you there, Tim?
Definitely.
Okay, all right. Because all of a sudden my phone just went so quiet, I thought maybe my batteries died. Okay.
Oh no, no problem at all.
Okay.
In
No.
terms of, I would agree. I would agree. Spirituality.
Here's another connection with the spiritual aspect of this. For us to develop as a society this kind of potent technology, we will have to grow up to another. We will have to grow up in equal measure in terms of our maturity, in terms of our capacity to refrain from violence and military action and violent confrontations and intimidation and stealing of resources and the bullying aspects of political policies. There's going to have to be a different kind of politics in order to create a different kind of technology. And we're going to have to get older and wiser. Otherwise, we're going to be blowing up solar systems and planets.
Sure. Well, and hopefully the first generation of this technology, I'm assuming that in some degree it'll be like automobiles, where you can get into a lot more trouble with a Ferrari than you can with a Model T. And I guess
Yeah.
the idea is that the first generation will not be small enough or compact enough or have enough features or power or output energy or anything that it would actually be as dangerous as something more advanced. But much like the computer, I suppose, the computer started out slow and can do a tremendous amount now just through refinement. So certainly, I don't think we would have an immediate transition. I think that if anti-gravity showed up and it was easy to replicate and humanly achievable, in a cost-efficient way, it would be there for at least several decades before it was very capitalized on. I can definitely agree with your perspective, though. Even in terms of civilian use, one of the things I looked at was anti-gravity vehicles, replacing the automobile and reducing the need that we currently have to just pave everything in sight over with concrete. My thought had been communities were originally shaped around a village, and maybe in some ways, anti-gravity would let us reshape those communities. But one of the immediate consequences of vehicles that fly would be, the need for regulation. How do we set up flight paths, and how do we do it in a manner so that the public remains safe, and yet, the travel is actually advanced instead of just becoming a traffic jam in the skies? Um, so there's definitely, I definitely agree with your need for change. Although I'm hoping, and I guess in some ways it's a large bet, that by the time we have the technology, we will also have maybe in some ways the spiritual advancement, and in other ways the technological advancement to be able to handle it wisely. Well, in terms of, so you talked to Pogklanov then, or at least emailed him several times,
Yep.
and it sounds like,
I've invited to him. I've invited him to my house for a barbecue and to sit around and smoke our pipes and drink red wine because the pipes featured into. That's how he discovered the gravity shielding effect by smoking a pipe next to a spinning superconductor, and he saw that there was a strangely shaped column of smoke above it. So that's to give him the clue. So we'll be out here barbecuing ribs and blowing smoke over it. See what's happening.
oh, sure.
Yeah, who else do you want to talk about?
Oh, well, and Nick Cook also, then, he was another contact. Who else have you been able to follow up with?
I've had a number of emails with Hal Pudoff,
Oh, okay.
who is perhaps one of the most interesting and enigmatic individuals on this subject. Hal Pudoff is one of the few people to actually be featured in both The Field by Lynn McTaggart and Nick Cook's The Hunt for Zero Point, which shows the depth and the breadth of his activities over this lifespan, over his career. He is a PhD physicist, and not only is he a world-recognized expert in the zero-point energy field, and his research, he claims, is classical physics, and he's looking to mine the energy out of the zero-point energy field as a way to providing, and these are my words, not his, free energy for spaceships, so that you wouldn't have to fill up with fuel, down at the Cape Kennedy Space Center, but that you could actually suck up the energy as you go if you had the technology of being able to pull the energy out of the zero-point energy field.
Oh, certainly. And Hal he's always struck me as almost like an onion, where there are so many different layers, and each
Yeah.
layer, when you peel it away, there's another layer. I learn something new about him every time I hear his name, and one of the things that it surprised me to learn a while ago was that, and if my understanding is correct, I might be mistaken. He actually set up the military's remote viewing program in the
Right.
1970s, and
Yeah.
it's in some ways it's always struck me as odd that he would jump from that to physics. It seems like a transition to the mundane in some ways.
Yeah. And again, another circles crossing. Um, there is a persistent story from both David Morehouse, who is the author of The Psychic Warrior, and is a former member of the Stargate Remote Viewing Squadron from the Army, which apparently is a different squadron than what Hal Pudoff was in charge with. Hal Pudoff was in charge of Project Starshine or something. I forget the exact name of it. That was CIA based, and Dave Morehouse was in the Army Remote Viewing Squadron, and God knows how many. And maybe they're one and the same. I don't know, with two different bosses or different allegiance, or there's just many different squadrons Hal Puthoff about that, and he said that he said, I have no personal knowledge of Ramtha or of any of his teachings, so I have no opinion on that. As for any possibility of his teachings being in an instructional manual, basically none that I know of, or something like that. So, and that's that enigmatic quality of Hal. Dr. Richard Boylan has come to the school and has talked on the Ramtha School and has talked about these subjects, and he calls Hal the owl.
Oh, now why's that?
Apparently, it's a nickname. Boylan alluded to the fact that it was even a code name. That among the many things that Hal Puthoff does is, and I have not discussed this with Hal whatsoever, is that Hal is on a committee that is attached to the National Security Administration to review potentials and methodologies of preparing the American public for contact with alien species. And apparently Boylan says that's the owl is Hal's code name on that committee. So.
Oh, okay. I guess it makes sense, and those two issues are actually connected: anti-gravity and the possibility of ET or UFOs existing. And I tend,
sure, yeah.
I wish I had a good opinion. I see, just like everyone else, I see the Discovery Channel shows, and one day it seems likely, the other day it seems unlikely. So, but it is something that I have no doubt that the government has looked at it just as a contingency plan. It would be, with the amount of public belief out there, it seems ridiculous that they would not at least have a contingency plan in the event that ET showed up on the White House lawn one of these days. So, and Hal would be one of the people who might. He knows about the physics. He knows about, apparently, the black operations world, or at least the methodology.
Yeah, I mean, he worked for the CIA for 12 years.
Sure.
He makes no bones about it.
Well, other than Hal, I know that you've kicked around a fair amount just in terms of following up on leads. Have you found anything really, really innovative? I mean, that other people might not be aware of in terms of just things that, kind of buried treasure, so to speak, along the way.
I don't know anybody that has an anti-gravitic device. I just got a bunch of good stories. And my feeling is that there's... let's back up a little bit. The word anti-gravity is a little misleading. It may be... Anti-gravity is like a slang term or a colloquial expression to really describe a bigger phenomena, and that's field effect propulsion.
Sure. I've always approached it from a cultural view. It's, you know it when you see it, and that's why the lifters, there have been so much debate about the lifters, but for me, they've always fallen under the category of anti-gravity because it's the kind of thing that you would think of. Although
anti-gravity is the quick way to describe it. I mean, it gets right to the heart of the matter.
Sure.
That you can fly without flapping your wings.
Yeah, precisely.
You don't need a motor, and or you don't need a jet engine. Okay. But there is tantalizing evidence, and reading between the lines, it's kind of like when you kind of know what to look for, or you're looking for something that isn't really the obvious. And when you're looking for the unobvious, the obvious unobvious, you begin to get some readings. I think Boeing has advanced craft. Can't prove it. I get some cryptic emails from people from time to time that say they're working for Boeing, but won't come forward, and they have, funny little email addresses and names and things like that. No one gives me their home phone number.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I don't print it, and I tell them so. I said, you're going to have to give me better than that, But some of the things that Boeing has released, and you can read about it in Popular Science or Scientific American and stuff like that, they just released, they just made public an aircraft that I think they have made 2 or 3 of, that they admit, at least publicly, called the X-45A, I think the number is. And apparently they've been working on a dozen different craft, and they're all like Popular Science magazine that it cost $600 million to develop. They were very proud of the fact that it was powered by a Citation commercial executive jet engine that only cost $2 million. So it begs the question, well, where'd the other, $598 million go if you just bought an off-the-shelf jet engine to fly this thing? They seem to be nonplussed that the $600 million aircraft had a top speed of 300 miles an hour.
Oh, well, I wonder if hopefully it didn't go into project management overhead.
Well, my feeling is that this is a hyperdimensional craft. That the next generation of stealth will be that the plane literally disappears. That it not only is it radar invisible, it simply does not exist in this time and space dimension.
I've wondered a lot about. It may seem odd, but with the lifters, and I've demonstrated those. You came over and we did a demonstration for quite a while. A lot of people have asked me what type of power supply we would use for commercially sized one, and I'd always thought jet engines would be a good way to go because they turn over, they produce a high amount of power, much more than an internal combustion engine. In a power to weight ratio, they're much lighter than a regular internal, like just a car engine. And you can put an alternator on them and draw as much power as you might need, at least up to the limits of the engine. So it would make sense that if they were building a prototype craft, they wouldn't want to mess around with two different prototype systems at once. It may seem odd to some people to have a jet engine powering an anti-gravity device, but in terms of being able to produce electricity, if it is an electrogravitic vehicle, it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some kind of hybrid craft, or that would certainly be that answers the question in my mind of what's the next step is to have some kind of hybrid craft that you have a jet engine that is a power plant that in effect is like the car battery that you use to start your engine. That's going to be providing the basic in-house kind of energies that are going to be required to create this hyperdimensional fields, these either these Torsian fields. Like, for instance, Dr. Dan Marcus, I think, had the most fascinating description of what successful anti-technology is going to look like, where you have a Torsian field, which is a rotating and moving field of energy within the field, like in the same way that a tornado is a field of air, is a structure of air within air, or a whirlpool is a structure of water within water, that if you can spin, and I'm not quite sure what kind of energies you would be spinning, but anyway, you create a Torsian field, and then it's within a larger field of electromagnetism. Again, what kind of electromagnetic field it is, I don't know, and the strengths and all of this, but this kind of work seems so parallel to what Pat Kletnoff is doing, and it's so parallel to, like I said before, the work of the counter-rotating fields in the Bell that the Germans had, and it seems to be very comparable in terms of creating this field around you, this swirling field around you. It's how Ramtha talks about spinning the bands, as people would say, one's aura, or the electromagnetic fields of the body. If you can organize them through going into a trance and through very single-minded focus, and that you can see those bands and you can spin those bands and you can have one set of bands rotating counter to the other, that you would levitate. And it also brings up an interesting association that I've heard from various sources, that advanced UFO technology is in many ways organic machinery, that it's machinery that interfaces with an entity, with a living entity, and that the actual UFO is alive. The materials are alive and have a consciousness of an advanced sort. I think even basic metal, I think all things have consciousness. I think all things have a spirit. But I've heard it described, and again, it's just kind of anecdotal stuff that it's hard to, I wouldn't even know how to prove it or where to go to get definitive verifiable information. But the anecdotes are intriguing that UFOs fly as hybrid craft that require the participation of the passengers. That the passengers aren't just passengers. They're part of the technology. They're part of the guts of how this thing flies. They just don't steer it. They're not pilots. They're part of the engine. Their consciousness is part of the fuel, and you can't fly a UFO without an advanced consciousness. They're intertwined. It's an exciting concept.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
Yeah.
Bruce, we're almost out of time for today, and I should apologize. It's actually due to battery problems.
What's
Um,
that?
oh, it's actually due to battery issues. My battery's beeping at me, letting me know that we're running low. But
Yeah, my battery. I'm on a wireless machine, phone myself, and so it's beeping to me too. So.
oh, maybe it's yours then. Well, I sincerely appreciate your time, and this definitely
I
sounds like.
hey, listen, you're talking to a storyteller. I love flapping my gums any chance I get.
Oh well, I mean, I know that you've been able to find a tremendous amount of information, so this definitely sounds like an interview to continue at a later point in time. But for
Sure.
the time being, thank you again for your time and
Hmm.
for the great anecdotal stories. I've never heard a lot of this information before.
Hmm.
So, so
Yeah, and if
thanks
he
again.
wants to get a hold of me, give him my email. You can, I think it's posted on your website, right?
Sure. And actually, could you read the email off
Sure.
quickly?
Bruce Smith, one word there, at Rainier Connect. Rainier Connect is one word, and Rainier is like Mount Rainier, and Connect is the normal spelling. .com.
Okay, Bruce Smith at RainierConnect.com. Well, thanks
Mm-hmm.
again for your time, Bruce. Have a nice evening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.